The story of Jesus, the man whose short life on earth, his friendship, his healing and teaching brought into being the Christian gospel of good news for all men. This is the story. After Jesus was arrested, he was taken before the Jewish authorities for questioning, with the hope that it could be proved he was a rebel, not only against the religious customs, but against the political rulers as well. Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane with his disciples when Judas came with the temple guards to arrest him. For some time the ruler had waited a good opportunity to seize Jesus, and the night of the Passover supper was a time that they had been waiting for, because it could be done without stirring up the people. In the city of Jerusalem, night had fallen on many homes where preparations were being made for the great feast. At the same time, in the palatial home of Caiaphas the high priest, members of the Sanhedrin, who had been sent for secretly, were preparing for an important trial which could not wait for morning. When the members of the Sanhedrin whom he could trust were assembled, Caiaphas had Jesus brought before him, and the trial began. Many witnesses were called in order that the authorities might uncover evidence which could be used against Jesus in making a report to Pontius Pilate, the Roman procurator of Judea. Some of the witnesses were told to say things which were not true in order to find the prisoner guilty. Among other things, they claimed that they had heard Jesus say he would destroy the temple. Hearing their claims, the high priest looked at Jesus and asked, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But Jesus stood silent. He knew what Caiaphas was trying to do with these men who were not telling the truth. He had known long before that there would be men who would try to have him killed, so he would not answer them. Caiaphas became angry when Jesus did not answer and demanded that he testify whether or not he was the Christ, the Son of God. Then, to the surprise of all those present, Jesus answered Caiaphas, saying, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power, and coming with the clouds of heaven." At this, Caiaphas stood up in anger and tore his robes as he said, "You have heard this man say he was God himself. This is blasphemy. Why do we still need witnesses?" Then, turning to the members of the Sanhedrin, he shouted, "What is your judgment?" Annas, who was sitting next to him, answered, "This man is indeed guilty by claiming to be the Son of God. He deserves death." Jesus made no attempt to answer his accusers, but stood silent while the authorities pronounced him guilty. When the high priest heard the decision, it meant that Jesus would die, but he did not dare to carry out the sentence. Such punishment could only be ordered by the Roman governor or the province. So he ordered the guards to hold Jesus a prisoner until the Sanhedrin had decided what they should do next. The next morning, while it was still early, the orders were given to take Jesus to Pontius Pilate, the governor of Judea. Pilate lived in the great palace when he was in Jerusalem. It was here that Jesus was brought and where the religious authorities would gather to present their case before the governor. When Jesus was brought into the inner chamber of the palace, the centurion presented him to Pilate with the charge that the chief priests had accused him of speaking against their nation, of forbidding the people to pay tax to Caesar, and of saying that he himself was Christ the King. As Pilate listened to the charges, he watched his prisoner intently, and felt certain that this man in simple robes had been falsely accused, yet he could not ignore the request of the high priest. Then, probably to satisfy himself more than anyone else, Pilate asked Jesus if he was the King of the Jews. To Pilate's surprise, Jesus answered, "It is you who has said this." He refused to answer the charges against them. With this, Pilate went immediately to the place where the chief priests were waiting and questioned them again, but they repeated the charges he had already heard. Then Pilate returned to the inner room and asked Jesus, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But just as before, Jesus gave no answer, which caused the governor to wonder. Pilate went again to the chief priests and said, "I find no crime in this man." But the priests would not be quieted. Instead, their accusations became louder, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place." Hearing that Jesus was from Galilee, Pilate saw a way to get rid of the whole matter. He would send Jesus to Herod, the Tetrarch of Galilee. Now Herod could decide what to do with this man. So Jesus was taken at once to another part of Jerusalem, to the place where Herod was staying, for he too had come to the feast of the Passover. When Herod saw Jesus, he was glad, for he was hoping to see some miracle done by him. But the chief priests and scribes who had followed him to Herod's place angrily voiced their claims against Jesus. They were determined to get a decision as quickly as possible. Herod listened to the charges and accusations and realized that he would have to give definite word to the visiting priests, so began his questioning. The priests had claimed that Jesus said he was king of the Jews, but as Herod continued to question, the Nazarene stood before him and remained silent. His silence made Herod angry. Then, to mock Jesus, he ordered the soldiers to put a purple robe on him and to dress him like a king. After one of the soldiers had placed a reed in Jesus' hand as if it were the king's scepter, Herod and the others laughed and jeered at him in ridicule. When they had finished mocking and ridiculing him, Herod gave the orders for the soldiers to take Jesus back to Pontius Pilate, because the crimes for which he was charged had taken place in Pilate's territory. So Jesus, still wearing the tattered purple robe, was delivered again to Pilate, for Herod had said that the fate of Jesus was Pilate's responsibility. Pilate then called together the chief priests and the people and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was stirring up the people. I did not find him guilty of any of your charges, neither did Herod, for he sent him back to me. I will therefore chastise him and release him." The chief priests protested in loud voices that Jesus had been found guilty, that he was a danger to the state and should be crucified. Pilate saw their determination to crucify Jesus, and knowing that it was the custom to release a prisoner during the time of the Passover, he asked the crowd, "Whom will I release unto you, the robber named Barabbas, or Jesus, who is called Christ?" And the angry crowd, spurred on by the priests, demanded that Barabbas be released and Jesus crucified. Pilate attempted to reason with them by saying, "What evil has this man done?" The crowd ignored Pilate as their anger increased. They yelled and shouted all the more, "Crucify him! Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate could see that the restless mob was beginning to riot. He tried to reason with them again, but they would not listen. Suddenly he made a decision, and raising his hands, he demanded silence. When the noise began to stop, he ordered a basin of water brought to him. As they watched, he washed his hands before them, saying that he, Pontius Pilate, was innocent of the crime they wished to commit. If Jesus was to be killed, they would have to do it themselves. Then he ordered the guards to release Barabbas and to deliver Jesus to the crowd to be crucified. Here ends this tape. Please rewind it to the very beginning.